Isn't that beautiful? Where the orthodoxies of the world go apart, the mystic way unites. And understand, orthodoxies come in many forms, but always rigid, unchanging, frequently written down in fixed and static words, and perpetuated by a recognized and learned priesthood. Christianity and Judaism come immediately to mind, as do nationalisms and economic orthodoxies. But there's an insidious kind as well, that of learning itself, of the school. Continuing with the Campbell quote above, let me put my glasses on here. We read, "The orthodoxies are concerned primarily with the maintenance of a certain social order, within the pale of which the individual is to function, in the interest of which a certain system of sentiments must be instilled into every member, and in defense of which all deviants are to be, one way or another, either reformed, deformed, or liquidated. The mystic way, on the other hand, plunges within to those nerve centers that are in all members of the human race alike, and are at once the well springs and ultimate receptacles of life and all experiences of life." Hello, and welcome to the Omphalos Cafe, and my last video, I almost promise, on the topic of what I've called on numerous occasions James Joyce's monumental and monumentally misunderstood classic, Ulysses. To me, and what goes on here at the cafe, that misunderstanding of Joyce and his work has far-reaching consequences for us today in who we are and the challenges that we as a species face moving forward. Recently, I was reading an article drawing attention to what was called a crisis in mental health and even suicide on our university campuses. What better indication that the things we are teaching our young, the things we are filling their heads with, are increasingly divorced from their deepest psychospiritual needs. In short, because of everything that has gone before, because of our history, we moderns, we citified people of today think too much, and the ideas we are taught and think have little to no genuine relevance to what is truly going on. Words, thoughts, and complexities fill our heads and crowd out quiet, presence of mind, and sureness of action. The world about and life itself and our place in it has become a problem to be solved, and the books and pundits and intellectuals lining up to offer us answers to the seemingly unsolvable complexities we are confronted with multiply with each passing day. Maybe we delude ourselves, artificial intelligence or new generation of supercomputers with their stupendous number crunching capacity will provide the answers we crave. Good luck with that, I say, as Joyce would have. Unfortunately for us, he too has been lumped in with a great many 20th century writers and thinkers who have wittingly or not only added to the morass and confusion, the labyrinth of words, and thoughts we find ourselves lost within. Tell me if you can what genuine relevance as it is taught today, with all of its critical analysis and postmodern deconstruction, does literature in general and James Joyce in particular have for us? Where is the love of learning? Where is the inspiration and wonder? Where is the joy of discovery, both out in the world and more importantly, of the self and the world within? By the way, that line, words, I borrowed from James Joyce's fictionally autobiographical self, Stephen Dedalus, as he strolled Sandymount Strand in episode 3 of Ulysses. Another flower of his wandering muse was, "Thought is the thought of thought." And again, along the Strand, Stephen/the young Joyce, trapped in the labyrinth, despairingly asks, "What is the word all men come to know?" And there again is that need and craving for a word or more words. It's everywhere today, folks, and it's us. That need for an explanation, a definition, an answer, that need for somehow consoling words. So like I said, we people of today, we moderns, think too much because of everything that has gone before, because of our history. Which brings me to another well-known line of Stephen/the young James Joyce. In episode 2, in conversation with the headmaster at the school he is tutoring at, our young hero drops the line, "History is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake." Personally, with that line in mind, and the knowledge that Joyce put a great deal of work into the crafting of every single word he ever published, I don't believe it a coincidence that the last book Joyce/Stephen would write is called Finnegans, notice the missing apostrophe, Wake. Anyway, moving along, perhaps when all is said and done, the aim of these videos is to help a few courageous souls wake from the 100-year nightmare that has been Orthodox Joycean scholarship. And so, folks, that's where the poetic title for this video comes from. Wake up, you blockheads. The blockhead part is from an email I wrote a friend concerning a planned visit to Dublin and the James Joyce Centre. I said, only half in jest, that it was my intention of yelling, "You blockheads," from the open door of the centre, and then beating a hasty retreat. Here I am, in front of the centre. I didn't yell anything, though touring the place I felt like it. Instead, I decided to make a video. A Zen koan I've used in the past serves, with a little adaptation here. I said, there is no such thing as thinking outside the box, because thinking is the box. I could just as easily have said, there's no such thing as thinking outside the block, because thinking is the block. Now, in Ulysses, Joyce gives us a trio, a trinity, you might say, of heroes. There's his young self, Stephen, in the process of waking from the nightmare that is his and our history. Then, of course, there's Bloom, in the process of becoming unstuck, of leaving the mornings and his own psycho-spiritual constipation behind, and returning to a balanced and dynamic relationship with life and his wife. And finally, Molly, his wife, the real hero of the book, the freest, most uninhibited, and most natural of the bunch. You want a Joycean philosophy? You could do worse than study Molly's final chapter hymn to life and love and nature in all its crude and glorious wonder, especially as she lays waste to all of man and woman's pretensions. Let me read to you from the good book, chapter 4. Molly's lying in bed, and Bloom is putzing about, having made and brought her breakfast up to her. "Here," she said, "what does that mean?" He leaned downwards and read near her polished thumbnail, "Metempsychosis? Yes, who's he when he's at home?" "Metempsychosis," he said, frowning. "It's Greek, from the Greek. That means the transmigration of souls." "Oh, rocks," she said. "Tell us in plain words." Isn't that beautiful? Molly is all flow. She is music. She is completely, wonderfully alive and involved in the dance that is life. She alone is not hampered or hobbled by dead thoughts or ideas, moralities, isms, or orthodoxies. "Oh, blocks," she might just well have said. And then again, recalling the scene later in her own final flowing episode, and just to give a glimpse of her unblushing naturalness, I'll begin the quotation a line or two early. She muses, "I tried to draw a picture of it before I tore it up, like a sausage or something. Wonder they're not afraid of going about, of getting a kick or a bang or something there." And then that word met something with hoses in it, and he came out with some jawbreakers about the incarnation. He never can explain a thing simply, the way a body can understand. Now I love that, the way a body can understand. Not intellect, not reason, but body. That's pure Zen, folks, pure yoga. Because after all, the two, Zen and yoga, are the same thing, aiming or representing wholeness, oneness, and integration. In 1962, Alan Watts, the learner, teacher, and interpreter of Eastern philosophies and Zen Buddhism in particular, published a book relating his experiences under the influence of hallucinogenic drugs such as LSD, mescaline, and psilocybin. Hallucinogenics, Watts discovered, softens or dissolves the hard edges of thought, an idea we use to categorize and control the world, and what we're left with is living, raw impression, association, and flow. There's the book, The Joyous Cosmology. In the first line of the foreword, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert write, "The joyous cosmology is a brilliant arrangement of words describing experiences for which our language has no vocabulary." In the book, Watts writes, "In the type of experience I am describing, it seems that the superconscious method of thinking becomes conscious. We see the world as the whole body sees it. And for this very reason, there is the greatest difficulty in attempting to translate this mode of vision into a form of language that is based on contrast and classification. The principle," he goes on to say, "is that all dualities and opposites are not disjoined but polar. They do not encounter and confront one another from afar. They exfoliate from a common center. Ordinary thinking conceals polarity and relativity because it employs terms, the terminals or ends, the poles, neglecting what lies between them. The difference of front and back, to be or not to be, hides their unity and mutuality." But then, as Watts writes, there is simply no reason to explain it, for explanations are just another form of complexity, a new manifestation of life on top of life, of gestures gesturing. So, back to Ulysses, folks, and what's really going on. When it came to his writings, Joyce insisted, "With me, the thought is always simple." He also said in a letter to his brother, "Yet I have certain ideas I would like to give form to, not as a doctrine, but as the continuation of the expression of myself, which I now see I began in chamber music." And then, one more of his quotes, he said, "I'd like a language which is above all languages, a language to which all will do service. I cannot express myself in English without enclosing myself in a tradition." Do you see what I'm getting at? Without the use of hallucinogenics, he struggled to break through. He took the mystic path to wake up to that timeless place beyond words and explanations, that place of unity and wholeness. And once he got there, how was he to describe it using mere words? That's why Ulysses is shot through with music, why the hard words break down as his heroes, Stephen and Bloom, do, as seen in his crazy brothel episode. It's why Molly's final chapter flows almost without punctuation or break. And that's what's going on in Finnegans Wake, folks. The words themselves have dissolved into nuance, suggestion, organic flow, creation, and dissolution. Well, okay, let's take a step back. Obviously, with these Joycean videos, I am trying, whether successfully or not doesn't really matter, to point in a different direction than virtually everybody else when it comes to Ulysses. As a result, quite a few school-educated types have taken me to task for my opinionated wrong-headedness. Their criticisms are always idea-based, with a foundation of theory and analysis, aping pretty much exactly what their teachers taught them, and, not surprisingly, they virtually never speak of the book itself. On a couple of occasions, I've asked them to explain what seems to me a very simple thing. They still haven't answered or even tried. So, feel free to answer it for me, if you can. Now, if you read a biography of Joyce, either Richard Ellman's or this newer one by Gordon Bowker, I picked up at the James Joyce Center, it's painfully obvious how close Joyce stuck to his own story, his own development with his alter ego, Stephen Dedalus. In what remains to us of his unfinished and unpublished manuscript, Stephen Hero, in A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, right on into Ulysses, he recounts the exact happenings of his own journey and growth. Names have been changed, of course, but overall his writings, at least up to Bloom and Ulysses, are more autobiography than fiction. So my question to the scholarly crowd remains this. Now remember, for them, Ulysses is little more than a modern-day retelling of Homer's Odyssey. Bloom is a somewhat less than heroic version of Odysseus, bumbling in his ineffectual way home to his wife, who's taken a lover that afternoon, an average everyday nobody, we're told. Though what average man of 100 years ago could think such thoughts as, how can you own water really? It's always flowing in a stream, never the same, which in the stream of life we trace, because life is a stream. Or how about city full passing away, other city full coming, passing away too, other coming along, passing along. And then there's this beautiful exhortation to the young woman standing between the murderous-minded British soldiers and Stephen on the street outside the brothel. Bloom says, "Speak, you! Are you struck dumb? You are the link between nations and generations. Speak, woman, sacred life-giver." Hardly the words of an everyday average man, as Bloom is made out to be. And then, as far as the scholars are concerned, Stephen is there because Joyce needed a character to play Odysseus' son, Telemachus. He's pictured as a brooding intellectual and a failed artist type, and I've even heard some say Joyce began the book with him, but grew tired and bored and left him hanging, as Bloom supplanted him at center stage. But why, I've asked? Why would James Joyce, who unquestionably attained to full-fledged artistry, who obviously reached the place from which he wrote both of his mature works, Ulysses and Finnegans Wake, why in Ulysses would he leave his alter ego, Stephen Dedalus, up short? Why, that is, when he stuck so closely to his own story with Stephen, he even said to his friend Frank Budgeon during the writing of Ulysses, "I haven't let this young man off lightly, have I? Many writers have written about themselves. I wonder if any of them have been as candid as I have." Why, I ask, would he, who got to the creative place, leave Stephen behind as a failed artist and bitter intellectual? It simply makes no sense to me. What artistic purpose would that serve? Anyway, the only response from my critics I've gotten to that simple question is crickets. Nothing. The question is simple, folks, and of course, the answer is simple too. And to me, when it comes to our understanding of Joyce and Ulysses, and even the world we inhabit today, the simple answer changes everything. Joyce didn't leave Stephen behind. That's what's really happening in Ulysses, folks. Stephen, who is Joyce at 22, is in the process of breaking through. He's waking up from the nightmare of his and our collective history. Reading again from the book and Stephen's conversation with Mr. Daisy. "History," Stephen said, "is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awake." The book goes on, "From the playing field, the boys raised a shout, a whirring whistle, goal. What if that nightmare gave you a kick back?" Stephen thinks. And that nightmare will indeed give him a kick back at the end of the brothel episode, in the form of the two drunken British soldiers. They'll knock him flat, out cold, dead to the world. But then he'll awaken to a new friend, Bloom, and a new relationship with the world. He'll have undergone his symbolic death and resurrection. And that is what's really at the heart of Ulysses. So then you might ask, what then of Bloom? Well, Bloom still serves three major purposes. One, in continuing his own story, Joyce's own experience of the world at age 22 remained quite limited. Stephen is breaking through to artistic maturity, mystical Buddhahood, you might say, in this modern world of ours. With Bloom, we wander and take the modern city in a manner that Stephen hadn't yet experienced. Two, Stephen's early bitterness and its accompanying criticisms was a sure way of rousing the censors when it came to such things as sexuality, Irish nationalism, and Roman Catholicism. Joyce experienced that censorship for years as he attempted to get Stephen Hero, Dubliners, and then a portrait published. By Ulysses, he had learned the lesson well and knew exactly what he could and couldn't get away with. Bloom, unlike Stephen, observes the world in a more mature bemusement rather than bitterness. By the way, no one has commented on my assertion that rather than some highly abstruse junior literary exercise, Stephen, with his parable of the plums in episode 7, is actually picturing the Nelson Pillar as an erect British phallus complete with baggy brown scrotum spilling seeds in the heart of Dublin. I said it was an entirely appropriate symbol of what was taking place during British rule, and I also said Joyce was probably chuckling in his grave for getting that one by the censors. As a side note, in 1966, the IRA finally got around to blowing up the Nelson Pillar as what else but a symbol of British oppression. But finally, with Bloom, there's also his relationship with Molly, with woman. The young Joyce was not there yet. He hadn't formed that paramount relationship in a man's life. At the outset, and up to the crucial brothel episode, Stephen is still tearing himself free of his mother and hasn't said yes to life yet. So with Bloom and Molly, Joyce finally takes the saga of his own development into the realm of fiction. He externalizes, gives artistic form to what he himself learned through his own wife, Nora, who he used as the model for Molly. And like I said earlier, Bloom too is in the process of breaking through. In this case, breaking back through to life and a dynamic relationship with Molly. When we first meet him, he is mildly constipated, stuck, unassertive, or unmanned you might say, making Molly's breakfast in bed. Life in the city has dealt him some blows. His father's committed suicide. Worse, his son Rudy died at 11 days old. That was a hard blow for both of them. However, he too in the course of the day is undergoing change. The events of the day are precipitating him back into the field of action, you might say. He finally asserts himself against the bigoted citizen and begins to take compassionate action to help and protect the young Stephen from harm. And in meeting Stephen, he begins to make plans for the future again. He thinks Boylan in his narcissism will probably botch up the musical tour, but he could get one going. He thinks Stephen could teach Molly proper Italian for the airs she sings so masterfully, and he also thinks that if Stephen can sing half as good as his father, perhaps Molly and he could sing duets. And by the way, scholars, Stephen is not the failed artist in Ulysses. His father, Simon, is. Anyway, at the penultimate moment in the brothel episode, after Stephen has been symbolically crucified by the British/Roman soldiers, Bloom has a vision of Rudy in an Eton uniform. To me, it's as if Rudy is gazing at his father and saying, "It's okay, Dad, I'm all right. I love you. You can get on with your life now." And he does. And then there's this beautiful little example of Bloom asserting and regaining his sense of self. It's so beautiful and simple and right under our noses, folks. Pure Joycean subtlety and simplicity. As I said, when we first meet Bloom, he is making Molly's breakfast in bed. Not that it's a big deal, but it is a fairly untraditional role for a man back then. Up in the bedroom, he fumbles around in a servile manner, and Molly's ordering him here and there. Now let me read to you from the opening lines of Molly's amazing final episode soliloquy. She starts, "Yes, because he never did a thing like that before, as asked to get his breakfast in bed with a couple of eggs." Isn't that beautiful? Bloom's gone about the adventures of his day, finally come home, briefly given Molly an edited version of the day's happenings, and then told her he would like her to make his breakfast in bed later, with 2 eggs into the bargain. And she's like, "He wants me to make his breakfast in bed? Me? Who does his lordship think he is?" Whoa! She's outraged. "Well, I oughta. I'll help him with his astronomy studies. I'll send him to the moon," she's thinking. "He'll be seeing plenty of stars he has no names for when I'm through with them." Again, it isn't much, but something fundamental in Bloom has changed. Something in here, and Molly senses it and acknowledges it through her 60-odd page recapitulation of life in general and of their life together. That, to me, is the reason why she can end the book with her affirmation, her saying, "Yes." And finally, I promise, there's Stephen. What is he to learn in meeting Bloom? What did the young James Joyce need to learn before he could go on to write Ulysses and Finnegans Wake? What did he wake up to? And what could we all learn? Well, there's 2 things really. Stephen has to learn how to let go of his fears of the world and let go of his fretful little ego. And in letting go, he opens himself up to experiencing compassion for others, First in the crazy brothel episode with Bloom, and then through Bloom to everyone. Earlier in the day, again in conversation with Mr. Deasy, talking of God, Stephen points out the window towards the kids playing in the field, and he says, "That is God." He's partially right. God is life, and it's out in the streets and all around us. But he's not yet including himself. He's still standing apart from it, lost in his own labyrinth. But in the brothel, after finally opening up to Bloom, he has a comical vision of the second coming of Elijah. Where does it go? "Just one word more. Are you a god or a doggone clod? If the second advent came to Coney Island, are we ready? Flory Christ, Stephen Christ, Zoe Christ, Bloom Christ, Kitty Christ, Lynch Christ? It's up to you to sense that cosmic force. Have we cold feet about the cosmos? No. Be on the side of angels. Be a prism. You have that something within, the higher self. You can rub shoulders with a Jesus, a Gautama, an Ingersoll. Are you all in this vibration? I say you are." So that's life lesson number 1, that we are all participants in its unity. And life lesson number 2, let me read to you from his great summation of life in the form of his final published work, Finnegans Wake. It's the opening line, which many of you might be familiar with already. Oop, lost my page. Of course it runs, "River run past Eve and Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us by a commodious vicus of recirculation back to Howth Castle and environs." And so, in the very opening line of Finnegans Wake, we have the words "River Run" and "Howth Castle" and "environs" at the poles. River Run is the flow of life, and Olivia Pluribel, all rivers and all women, the archetypal female principle. And Howth Castle and environs is HCE, here comes everybody, haveth childers everywhere, Humphrey Chipton Earwicker, man the castle builder and castle destroyer, the archetypal male figure. And that play of the male and female, the yin and yang of life, will play through the wake in 10,000 ways, from the dawn of time, from Eve and Adams, round and right up to the present, as it does so in our lives today, and in fact, all life in general. That is also what the fictional Stephen will learn from meeting Bloom and presumably Molly later. And that is what Joyce learned in meeting Nora, the woman who would say yes to him on that fateful day, June 16th, 1904, the day they first walked out together, and the day in Ulysses he would use in homage, in celebration of his meeting Nora and waking to the wonder and mystery that is all life. And that, departing from Bloom's backyard at the end, is what Stephen disappears into the pre-dawn darkness to go contemplate, beneath the heaven Bodhi tree of stars, no less. Life, the eternal dance of the sexes, the female and male, the male and female. Let me read one last time from the good book, episode 17. Bloom is finally, after a day of wandering and adventure, lying beside his wife Molly in bed. The book reads, "In what directions did listener and narrator lie? Listener, southeast by east, narrator, northwest by west, on the 53rd parallel of latitude north and 6th meridian of longitude west, at an angle of 45 degrees to the terrestrial equator. In what state of rest or motion? At rest, relatively to themselves and to each other, in motion, being each and both carried westward, forward, and rearward respectively by the proper perpetual motion of the earth through ever-changing tracks of never-changing space. In what posture? Listener reclined semi-laterally, left hand under head, right leg extended in a straight line and resting on left leg, flexed in the attitude of Gia, Tellus, fulfilled, recumbent, big with seed. Narrator, reclined laterally, left with right and left legs flexed, the index finger and thumb of the right hand resting on the bridge of the nose in the attitude depicted on a snapshot photograph made by Percy Apjohn, the child man, weary, the man-child in the womb. And that's it. The male and female, the yang and the yin, floating through infinite space at the center of it all. Well, folks, that was a long one. If you've made it this far, I thank you and wish you the best. Hope you've got something from it. Hope maybe you get a different appreciation for what's going on in Ulysses. This has been the Omphalos Cafe. We'll see you next time. Thanks.